Welcome to the latest episode of Double Feature. I'm your host, Pedro, and in today's episode, I'll be talking about two movies that are somewhat related to an ongoing concern in the entertainment industry: creating content for an audience in a deeply divided society.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Of course, this is hardly a 2023 problem. If modern day movies and TV shows are trying to address representation issues, particularly concerning diversity and inclusion, the fact is that the industry has struggled in the past to connect with other population segments that at a given point in time weren't represented or portrayed or even saw themselves reflected in the themes of the most popular content. In the late 1960s, after the likes of The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, and Easy Rider kickstarted the movement known as New Hollywood, there was a focus and a push for stories centered around young anti heroes who opposed the establishment and the powers in place. These movies, and the characters in them, were in direct opposition to the views and sentiments of a significant portion of the movie going audience. This was what then US President Richard Nixon called the silent majority. The silent majority was known for its conservative and patriotic views and opposition to the countercultural movements of the time. People who certainly wouldn't relate to the new brand of protagonists and stories that Hollywood was interested in showing. Those who grew up with the likes of John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart, and James Cagney certainly had a hard time connecting with the ethos embodied by the likes of Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman. Studios at the time came up with a counter programming strategy aimed at bringing Silent Generation audience members back to the theaters. The result was a bunch of movies, commonly known as vigilante films. New series such as Dirty Harry, starring Western icon Clint Eastwood, and Death Wish, featuring Charles Bronson, fit the mold and appealed to those opposing to the countercultural movement of the 1960s and 70s. The genre was known to portray its leads as lone, angry, well armed beacons of truth, justice, and the American way. In a sense, they were a natural evolution of the Old West law enforcer. Rugged and stoic, the likes of Dirty Harry traded the American frontier for urban settings and had as targets those who disturbed the natural order of things. They were pretty much a combo of Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson by the way of Chuck Norris. But whereas the likes of Paul Kersey, a mild mannered, middle class, white collar architect, and Harry Callahan, a rogue law enforcer who wore a suit and tie, embodied the more sophisticated side of the establishment, the 1970s saw a boom of several other characters who didn't share the status and worldly experience of the two former icons. Blue collar figures who shared the same views and opinions, but lacked the proper channels or clout, if you will, to act upon them. So today, I'm bringing you two examples of such characters. Two movies dealing with corruption and the breakdown of societal norms. Two titles that find a protagonist taking matters into their own hands. So let's get to it.
Hey Joe, don't it make you wanna go to war once more?
In John G. Avildsen's Joe, we are introduced to Joe Curran, a working class bigot who will spout off his views to anyone who will listen. He is an extremely exclusive bigot since he seems to hate everything and everyone equally: hippies, minorities, the government, and the producers responsible for greenlighting the TV show Velma. While Joe is delivering one of his rants, advertising executive Bill Compton is in the neighborhood looking for his daughter. He enters her apartment only to find her boyfriend, who was responsible for her previous overdose. After an initial confrontation, he kills the boyfriend in a fit of rage. Compton then proceeds to numb the gravity of his actions by crawling into the bar where Joe presents his one man show, and after a couple of drinks, he confesses that he just killed a hippie. Joe reacts calmly. It's from this point onwards that the movie gets really interesting. Joe and Compton form an interesting bond. Joe contacts Compton at his office to express his admiration and strives to forge a bond with someone who's clearly outside of his social circle but shares the same values. Compton, on the other hand, agrees with this friendship, fearing that any sort of rejection may lead Joe to turn him into the authorities. It's the interaction between this odd couple that really gives this movie a soul. Check out this awkward sequence during a dinner party hosted by Joe and his wife.
Well, I can see we're going to get along real good. What do you have, a Bud or 7 and 7?
Bud or 7 and 7?
And we got ginger ale, too.
Yes, how will you have your Seagram 7 Crown, dear? Ginger ale or 7-Up?
Oh, ginger ale's fine, thank you.
Ginger ale, beautiful. And for the gentleman?
Bud.
Bud, the king of beers.
The socially aware Comptons versus the oblivious Corrans, with Joe and his wife trying to impress wealthy people, but without a frame of reference. The movie's tone and message are what really sets it apart from the other titles released at the time. Of course, these aspects are defined by the wonderful performance of the entire cast. Dennis Patrick and Kay Callan are outstanding, and Susan Sarandon's debut set the template for a role she will be playing for the rest of her life outside the screen. But the real highlight is Peter Boyle. Joe is pretty much Peter Boyle's show. Boyle pulls an Archie Bunker before Archie Bunker even existed. He takes on a complex role of a character who is not a villain, even though he behaves like one. And sure, he may even have a valid point or two resulting from his life experience, but the man cannot simply articulate, let alone express, what he feels. Joe Curran is a man whom you fear and pity at the same time. A man who probably voted for Nixon in 1960, whilst his counterpart, Bill, might have voted for Kennedy. Joe is a man with whom the country ended up siding with. Peter Boyle would later portray other seedy characters in such titles like Taxi Driver, Hardcore, and The Friends of Eddie Coyle, before he became known to a whole new generation through his role as Frank Barone in the sitcom Everybody Loves Raymond, a grumpy, yet slightly more filtered, kinder, and non-alcoholic version of Joe. It's unfortunate that back in the 1980s, movie actors didn't do television very often, because I think Peter Boyle would have made a great fit as Norm Peterson in the R-rated version of the TV show Cheers. Joe became a sleeper hit for Cannon Group in 1970, generating $26 million in revenue, or $200 million when adjusted for inflation, on a budget of only $106,000. The movie script, penned by Norman Wexler, was also nominated for an Oscar in the Best Original Screenplay category. Later, in the 1980s, Cannon, now under the management of Golan and Globus, tried to resurrect the character and planned for a whole franchise similar to Death Wish. In 1985, the studio announced the first sequel, Citizen Joe, a project that never materialized. Well, thanks to an anonymous source, I was able to get access to exclusive materials and plans for the other installments in the Joe franchise. So here are all the movies we were deprived of. G.I. Joe, a prequel set during the Korean War starring Steve Guttenberg as a young Joe Curran. Joe Blogs, a sequel set in London. And of course, the inevitable Netflix reboot titled Joseph, starring Morgan Freeman. Oh, what could have been. When all is said and done, Joe has aged remarkably well. It's a movie that could easily be made today to showcase how most of our evolution in the last 5 decades has been mostly superficial, and the divide that people keep talking about always existed. It's a movie that takes a co-lead and shows how yesterday's liberal becomes today's conservative. Beautifully executed, greatly acted, and extremely well paced, John G. Avildsen's Joe is surely the way to go.
Mitchell, people don't like you. What kind of a policeman are you anyway?
Brute force with a badge. His name is Mitchell. Joe Don Baker is Mitchell.
Lighter than this episode's first entry, Mitchell is a 1975 B movie that's more focused on action than politics. It's also the first time I've picked a movie that was prominently featured in one episode of the cult TV series Mystery Science Theater 3000, an episode that I'll quote in moderation during this segment. Directed by Andrew V. McLachlan, the man responsible for sexually suggestive titles such as Something Big and The Last Hard Man, Mitchell stars Joe Don Baker in the title role. The movie's plot centers around John Mitchell, a tough and uncompromising police detective who is investigating a series of robberies and murders committed by a ruthless crime syndicate. Mitchell's investigation leads him to a wealthy businessman named James Arthur Cummings, who he suspects is the mastermind behind the criminal organization. Despite being warned by his superiors to back off the case, Mitchell continues to pursue Cummings and his associates, even when it means breaking the law and risking his own life. Now, this sounds like a decent enough plot to carry a movie, and if you ignore the naysayers and have an open mind, you'll be able to appreciate Mitchell and all the schlockiness it brings to the table. Marvel at Joe Don Baker playing the American version of Torrente. Appreciate John Saxon and Martin Balsam's greatness. Endure the chase sequences Mystery Science Theater 3000 said made driving Miss Daisy look like Bullet. And witness the superior action sequences involving dune buggies. As expected, the movie received mostly negative reviews upon its release. But once you get past the cheesy dialogue and uncomfortable love scenes, Mitchell has tons of entertainment value.
Right.
It isn't the greatest action movie ever made, but it still captures a time and a place that no longer exists, and the characters living there. It's not as sophisticated as The French Connection or even Dirty Harry, but it does prove a point. When two titles, one that strives for quality like Joe, and a C movie like Mitchell, portraying the same reality and similarly aggressive, no bullshit type of characters, you better believe that a lot of people were really like that in the 1970s. Mad as hell. And if you disagree with me, well, like Mitchell once said,
Piss off.
so there you have it. Two recommendations for those of you who want to see movies that couldn't be made today. Once again, I'm Pedro from Vinyl and Celluloid. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in finding out my thoughts and read my reviews on other movies, go on over to my Letterboxd page, where you can browse over 200 movie reviews penned by yours truly. Until next time, keep the reels rolling.